Welcome to Sleepy Beep. Settle in now. Let the day loosen its grip on you, the way a coat slips off your shoulders when you finally get home. There is nothing you need to do here, nothing to solve, nothing to remember, nothing to hold on to. You can let your eyes close whenever they want to close. You can let this voice become a small warm light in a dark room, and you can drift toward it, or away from it, or just rest somewhere in the middle where the words go soft at the edges. Tonight we are going to think together, very slowly, about something strange and quiet and a little bit tender. It is a small truth about people, about why we come to like the people we like. And it turns almost everything you were taught about kindness gently upside down. You do not need to know any psychology to follow it. You do not need a pen or a notebook or a single ounce of effort. I will walk you through every idea by the hand, and I will explain every unfamiliar word the moment it appears, the way you would explain something to a friend lying in the dark beside you, both of you, half asleep. Take a slow, deep breath. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is where you are listening from, let yourself sink a little deeper into the mattress, into the pillow, into the plain and simple fact that you are here, and you are allowed to rest. If you feel like it, you might leave a small note later, whenever, telling me what hour it is in your part of the world and where you have curled up to listen. But that is for the waking you some other time. The sleeping you has nothing to do. Just breathe and let us begin. I want to start with someone you already know, not a famous person, just someone from your own life. Picture the kindest person you know, the one who always shows up, the one who remembers your birthday and asks how your mother is doing and brings the extra chair and stays late to help clean up when everyone else has drifted toward the door. The one who gives and gives and gives without ever seeming to keep a tally. You can probably see their face. Hold it there gently for a moment. Now here is the strange thing. Here is the small ache at the center of tonight. That person, the kindest one, the most generous one, the one who pours themselves out for everyone around them, is very often the least appreciated person in the room. Not disliked, not resented, exactly, just somehow taken for granted. Their kindness has become like the wallpaper, or the hum of the refrigerator, or the color of the sky, always there, and therefore mostly unseen. People lean on them without quite thanking them. People accept their gifts and forget them by morning. And if you have ever been that person, if you have ever given and still felt strangely invisible, still felt that quiet loneliness of doing so much and being noticed so little, then you already know the feeling I mean. It is one of the oldest and softest sorrows there is. And it is not a flaw in you. It is not proof that you loved the wrong people, or that you are unlucky, or that the world is simply ungrateful. It is something much stranger than that. It is a rule, hiding in plain sight, about how human hearts actually work. And most of us have been getting it backwards our whole lives. Because here is what we all believe, deep down, without ever quite saying it out loud. We believe that if you want someone to like you, you should be good to them, give to them, do things for them, be useful, be generous, be the one who helps. It seems so obvious it barely feels like a belief at all. It feels like gravity. Of course people like the ones who are kind to them. Of course affection flows toward the giver the way water flows downhill. But it doesn't. Not the way we think. And tonight, very slowly, in the dark, I want to show you why. Let me tell you about an experiment. Don't worry, I will never make you work to follow a study. I will lay each one out like a little bedtime story, with all the sharp corners sanded down. This one happened in the year 1969, and it was done by two researchers named Jecker and Landy. They wrote it up under a title that sounds almost sweet when you say it slowly. Liking a person as a function of doing him a favor, which just means, in plain words, they wanted to know what happens to your feelings about someone after you do something nice for them, not after they do something nice for you. The other direction, after you do the favor. Does helping someone make you like them more or less, or leave you exactly the same? Here is how it went. People came in and took part in a contest, and in that contest they won some money. Real money, in their own hands, theirs to keep. And then the room split into three quiet paths. For one group of people, the man running the experiment came over to them afterward, and he told them, a little sheepishly, that the money they had won had actually come out of his own pocket, his own funds, and he was running a bit short now, and he wondered, as a personal favor, one human being to another, whether they might be willing to give the money back to him. That is a real thing to ask of a person. You have the cash in your hand. You won it fairly. And now this man is asking you, quietly, to hand it back. Some of them did. They gave the money back to him, personally, as a favor. For a second group, the money got asked for too, but not by the man himself. Instead, a secretary came and asked them to return it, and not for the man, but for the psychology department. Cold, official, impersonal, not a favor for a human being, just a form to fill, a rule to follow, money returned to an institution rather than to a face. And for a third group, nothing was asked at all. They simply kept their winnings and walked away with the cash still warm in their pockets. Now here is the question, and I want you to hold it lightly, the way you would hold a question you already suspect has a strange answer. Afterward, all these people were asked how much they liked the man who had run the whole thing. Who liked him the most? Common sense, that old familiar gravity, gives you an easy answer. Surely the people who got to keep the money liked him best. He gave them money and let them walk away with it. What's not to love? And surely the people who had to hand their winnings back to him, personally, out of their own pockets, surely those people liked him the least. He cost them money. He took back what was theirs. He asked them for a favor that emptied their hands. Of course they would feel a little cooler toward him. But that is not what happened. It was the opposite. The people who gave the money back to him, the ones who did him the personal favor, who lost the cash, who were left with nothing to show for it, those were the people who liked him the most, more than the ones who kept the money, more than the ones who returned it to the faceless department. The benefit had flowed the wrong way. He had, in a sense, taken from them, and yet their affection had grown. They gave the money back, and they liked him more. Let that settle for a moment. Let it be as strange as it actually is. Because this is not a trick of clever wording, and it is not a rounding error. It quietly demolishes the whole idea we started with. If we truly liked people simply because they benefited us, then the ones who kept the cash should have adored him, and the ones who lost it should have grumbled. Instead, the ones who sacrificed for him warmed to him. The favor they did him, the small cost they paid, did not drain their goodwill. It manufactured it. Their liking followed their giving, not the other way around. And I know, half asleep, this might feel like a riddle you can't quite hold. That is fine. You don't have to hold it. Let it float there. because we are going to circle back to why this happens slowly over the course of the night, and by the end it will feel not like a riddle at all, but like something you have always dimly known about yourself. But for now, let me just plant a small seed, a promise for the hours ahead. What if the reason the kindest person you know is the least appreciated, and the reason those people liked a man more for taking their money are the very same reason? What if liking someone does not run in the direction we all assumed? What if it runs backwards, not from the person who gives to you, but from the person who acts, whoever they are? What if the warmest feelings belong not to the one who receives the favor, but to the one who does it? Hold that thought like a small stone warmed in your palm. We'll come back to it. For now, let me take you much further back in time, to a story that is older than any experiment, older than the word psychology itself. A story told by a man who noticed this strange rule long before anyone had a name for it, and who used it deliberately, coldly, beautifully, to win over a person who hated him. The man was Benjamin Franklin, and he wrote about this himself in his own book, the one we now call the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. I want to be honest with you about something, gently, before I tell it, because honesty is part of what makes a story worth resting inside. This is Franklin's own account of his own cleverness. It is a memory he chose to write down about himself, and people who write about their own triumphs tend to tidy them up a little, tend to make themselves look wiser than they perhaps were on the day. So we hold it a little loosely. It is not a laboratory, it is a story. But it is a true story about a real man, and it lines up so precisely with what the laboratory later found that the two of them seem to lean against each other like old friends. So let us explore it. Picture Franklin as a younger man, not yet the white-haired figure from the old paintings, but a rising, ambitious, sharp-elbowed man making his way in the political life of Pennsylvania. He served in what was called the Pennsylvania Assembly, the group of men who governed, who argued, who voted, who held the small levers of power in that colony. And in that assembly there was another man, a rival, someone Franklin describes only as a gentleman of fortune and education, a man of money and learning, in other words, someone with real standing, real influence. A man not easily pushed aside. And here is a small detail I want you to notice, because it opens a little door in the story that never quite closes. Franklin never tells us this man's name. He describes him. He tells us he was wealthy and educated and destined for influence. But the name itself, Franklin leaves out. On purpose, it seems. And so, 250 years later, lying here in the dark, we are left with a tiny mystery that will never be solved. Who was he? Who was this rival, this enemy, this man whose heart Franklin set out to change? The name is simply gone, sealed off by Franklin's own choice, and no amount of wondering will bring it back. You can let that little question drift beside you as we go. Some doors in a story are meant to stay a little open. This is one of them. What we do know is that this man opposed Franklin, and not gently. Franklin tells us the man made a speech against him, a hostile speech, a public one, the kind of thing that stings and lingers. This new rival had power, and he had education, and he was turning both against Franklin. And Franklin, being who he was, did not want an enemy like that. An enemy of fortune and education was exactly the sort of enemy who could do real harm over the years to come. Franklin wanted him as a friend, or at least as an ally, or at the very least as someone who would stop working against him. Now think about what most of us would do. what the common wisdom, that old gravity, would tell us to do. We would try to win the man over. We would flatter him, we would compliment his speeches and laugh at his jokes and agree with him in meetings. Or we would try to do him favors, offer him things, help him with something, make ourselves useful and pleasant and generous, and hope that all that giving would slowly melt the ice between us. That is the instinct. Give and be liked. Serve and be loved. Pour yourself out, and surely the warmth will come back to you. Franklin did none of that. Franklin did the opposite. And this is the small hinge on which the whole night turns, so let it land softly. Instead of giving this man anything, Franklin asked this man for something. He asked him for a favor. He had heard that this gentleman had, in his personal library, a certain book. Franklin describes it with a phrase I love. He calls it a very scarce and curious book. Scarce, meaning rare, hard to find, the kind of book you could not simply go out and buy. Curious, in the old sense of the word, meaning unusual, interesting, remarkable, a book worth wanting. Franklin never tells us the title. That's another small door left open. We don't know which book it was. We only know it was rare and desirable and sitting on the shelf of a man who could not stand him. So Franklin wrote him a letter, a simple, direct, courteous note. He told the man that he had heard he owned this scarce and curious book, and that he, Franklin, very much wished to read it, and would the gentleman be so kind as to lend it to him for a little while. That was all. No flattery, no gift, no grand gesture, just a small, honest request, one educated man to another. Might I borrow your book? And here is the beautiful part, the part where you can almost feel the strange rule beginning to turn. The man sent the book immediately. At once, whatever hostility he felt toward Franklin, the request landed on some other part of him, the part that is quietly flattered to be asked, the part that likes to be seen as generous, the part that finds it oddly hard to say no to a small, reasonable favor from a fellow man of learning. He sent the scarce and curious book right over. Franklin kept it about a week. He read it, or at least he held on to it long enough to make the borrowing feel real and considered. And then he sent it back. But he did not simply return it. He returned it with a note, a warm note, a note, in his own words, strongly expressing his sense of the favor. In other words, Franklin made very sure to thank the man, clearly and generously, for the kindness he had done. He closed the loop. He let the man know in no uncertain terms that his small act of lending had been seen and valued and appreciated. Now watch what happens to the enemy. Watch the hostility dissolve. Franklin tells us that the next time the two men met in the assembly, the gentleman spoke to him, which he had never done before. He spoke to Franklin directly, and with what Franklin describes as great civility, courtesy, warmth even. This man who had made a hostile speech against him, this rival of fortune and education, now approached him kindly, all on his own. And it did not stop there. From that time on, Franklin says, the man showed himself ready to help Franklin on every occasion. He became a friend, and more than that, the friendship lasted. It continued, Franklin tells us, all the way until the man's death. A lifelong friendship, born not from a gift Franklin gave, but from a favor Franklin asked. Sit with the shape of that for a moment, because it is such a lovely and unlikely shape. Franklin did not warm the man's heart by being generous to him. He warmed it by letting the man be generous to Franklin. He turned an enemy into a lifelong friend, not by giving, but by receiving, by asking, by making himself, for one small moment, the person in need, and letting the other man be the person who helped. And Franklin, being Franklin, did not leave the lesson unspoken. He wrote down a sentence about it, a single, plain, almost proverb-like sentence that names this entire strange rule in one breath. I want to give it to you exactly as he wrote it, slowly, because it is worth carrying to sleep with you. He wrote, "He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged." Let me say that again, even more slowly, and unfold it as we go, because it holds the whole night inside it. He that has once done you a kindness, meaning the person who has once done something nice for you, will be more ready to do you another, will be more willing, more eager to do something nice for you again than he whom you yourself have obliged. And that last phrase, he whom you yourself have obliged, simply means the person you have done a favor for, the person you helped, the person you gave to. So hear the full, quiet shock of it. The person who has done you a favor is more likely to help you again than the person you have helped. The giver becomes the friend, not the one who received your kindness, the one who gave you theirs. Doing a favor for someone binds you to them. It is not the receiving that builds the warmth. It is the giving. And so, if you want someone to feel close to you, the strange, backwards, almost dizzying move is not to do something for them. It is to let them do something for you. Franklin, notice, did not claim to have invented this. He called it an old maxim. A maxim is just a saying, a piece of folk wisdom, the kind of thing passed quietly from one generation to the next, long before anyone tested it or wrote it into a textbook. Franklin said he was simply remembering an old maxim and choosing to apply it deliberately, on purpose, like a tool he had reached for and decided to use. He did not discover the rule, he recognized it, and he pointed it, coolly, at a man who hated him, and watched it turn that man into a friend for life. The name we use now, the Ben Franklin effect, Franklin himself never used. That name came much later, given by psychologists in the 20th century, looking back at his story and seeing in it something they could study, something they could name after the man who had described it so cleanly. But the thing itself, the rule underneath, is far older than Franklin, older than the assembly, older than the scarce and curious book. It is, as Franklin said, an old maxim, perhaps as old as people. And here we arrive at the edge of the night's first mystery, and I want to leave you resting right at that edge so that the questions can keep you company as you drift. Because we now have two stories that point the same impossible direction. We have a laboratory in 1969 where people gave their money back to a man and liked him more for it. And we have a memoir from more than 2 centuries ago where a man lent his rival a rare book and ended up a lifelong friend. In both, someone did a favor, gave money back, lent a book, and in both, the doing of the favor was what created the affection. The warmth followed the action. It did not come first. It was not the cause of the giving. It was the result of it. And that should feel, if you let it, genuinely mysterious. Because it seems to run against everything we feel we know about our own hearts. We like to believe that our feelings come first and our actions follow, that we help the people we already care about precisely because we already care about them. First the warmth, then the deed. That is how it seems from the inside. That is how it feels to be a person. You love someone, and so you do things for them. The feeling leads, the action follows. But these two stories are whispering something else. They are whispering that it can run the other way. that sometimes we do the deed first, we hand back the money, we lend the book, and then, quietly, without noticing, our feelings rearrange themselves to match what we have already done. As if some hidden part of us looks at our own behavior, sees that we have been kind to this person, and concludes, well, I must like them then, I must care about them. Why else would I have done that? And the warmth arrives, after the fact, to explain the action that already happened. The feeling comes last and pretends it came first. That is the engine underneath all of this. That quiet, invisible process by which our behavior gets written down first, and then our feelings are edited afterward to match. And it has a name. And the man who gave it that name did his own strange and famous experiments to prove it, and we will get to all of that slowly in the parts of the night still ahead. I promise you the whole mechanism laid out gently so that by morning or by the time sleep takes you, whichever comes first, you will understand not just that this happens, but exactly why it happens. Deep in the machinery of being human. But before we go there, I want to leave 3 small questions floating in the dark around you, like slow lanterns on a still pond. You don't have to answer them. You don't even have to keep thinking about them. Just let them drift. The first question is the one the story itself refuses to answer. Who was he? Who was Franklin's rival, this gentleman of fortune and education, this man of money and learning who made a hostile speech and then became a friend for life? Franklin sealed the name away, on purpose, and it is gone now, 2.5 centuries downstream, and we will never know it. A small mystery, kept forever, let it be. Some names are simply lost, and there is a strange peace in accepting that. The second question is the one the experiment leaves us holding. Why did the people who gave their money back like the man more? Why did losing something for someone make them warmer toward him, when every instinct we have says it should have made them cooler? We have felt the strangeness of it. Now, over the hours ahead, we will slowly answer it. And the third question is the quietest and the most tender, and it hangs over this entire night like a soft cloud that will not quite clear until the very end. Is this manipulation? Because if it is true, if you really can warm someone's heart toward you by asking them for a favor, by letting them give to you, by pointing this old maxim at them the way Franklin pointed it at his rival, then a darker thought creeps in right behind it. Could you use this on people? Could someone use it on you? Is it connection, or is it a trick? Is Franklin a wise man who understood human nature, or a clever man who manipulated an enemy into friendship for his own gain? And how, in your own life, with the people you love, are you ever supposed to tell the difference between building a real bond and simply farming a feeling? That question does not have a quick answer, and I will not give you a cheap one. We are going to earn the answer together, slowly, honestly, all the way at the end. For now, it is enough to let the question exist, to let it be there, unresolved, a little uncomfortable, a little beautiful, resting beside you in the dark. So here is where we are, as the first part of the night comes to its close and the deeper hours open ahead. We have felt the ache of the kindest person, the one who gives and goes unappreciated, and we have begun to suspect that their invisibility is not bad luck but a hidden rule. We have watched people in a room give their money back to a man and grow fonder of him for it. We have watched Benjamin Franklin turn a hostile rival into a lifelong friend with nothing more than a borrowed book and a warm note of thanks. And we have heard his old sentence, the one that names it all: "He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another." than he whom you yourself have obliged. The person who helps you is the one who ends up loving you, not the one you help. And that reversal, that quiet, dizzying flip of everything we assumed about how affection works, is the thread we are going to follow now, all the way down into the machinery of the human heart itself, into the strange and gentle question of how it is that a person can come to care for someone, not because of what they feel, but because of what they have already done. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the questions drift. Let Franklin and his unnamed rival and the people in that room handing back their winnings all fade softly into the background of your mind, like figures moving quietly in another room while you rest. There is nothing you need to hold. There is nothing you need to solve tonight. And when you are ready, we will follow this thread a little deeper, into the reason behind it all, the hidden ghostwriter inside every one of us, the one who writes down what we do, and then, ever so gently, rewrites how we feel. There is a word for this ghostwriter, a name given to the mechanism by a man who spent years trying to understand why human beings so rarely do what they believe, and so reliably believe what they have already done. The man's name was Leon Festinger, and in 1957 he published a small, dense, quietly revolutionary book called A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. It was not a long book, as psychology books go. It was not written in warm or easy language, but the idea inside it was so clean, so unsettling, so immediately recognizable as something true about being human, that it has been rattling around in the science of the mind ever since, and the Franklin effect, the strange loop where a favor given makes the giver fonder, is one of its most elegant and counterintuitive expressions. Festinger's central claim was simple. Simple in the way that most true things are, once someone finally says them out loud. He said that human beings cannot comfortably hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time. Or, more precisely, they cannot comfortably hold a belief and a behavior that point in opposite directions. When those two things conflict, something happens. A pressure builds. Not a dramatic pressure, not something you would notice or name in the moment. More like a low, persistent hum of wrongness that the mind moves to silence. And the way it silences the hum is not always by changing the behavior. Very often, it is by changing the belief. Sit with that for a moment. The behavior stays. The belief bends. This is the thing that most of us have backwards. We tend to assume that our feelings are the source, that we decide how we feel, and then we act accordingly. We feel affection, so we help. We feel hostile, so we pull away. We feel enthusiastic, so we volunteer. The feeling leads, and the action follows, like a cart behind a horse. This is simply how it seems from the inside. And Festinger looked at all of that common sense and said, quietly, that it is frequently the other way around. The action leads. And then the feeling follows, catching up, catching up, catching up, and quietly rewriting itself to look like it was always there. He called the discomfort of the mismatch cognitive dissonance. Cognitive because it is a conflict between cognitions, between pieces of knowledge or belief that the mind holds simultaneously. Dissonance because those pieces are out of tune with each other, the way two notes played together that do not belong together produce a sound that asks to be resolved. And the resolution, the way the mind tunes itself back to consonance, is almost always the same. The belief shifts. It adjusts. It leans quietly in the direction of what the person has already done, until the wrongness fades, and a comfortable new version of the story takes its place. The action writes the first draft, the feeling comes in later and edits itself to match. Think of a time you volunteered for something you did not particularly want to do. Maybe a friend asked, and you said yes out of habit or obligation. And then you showed up, and you did the work, and somewhere in the middle of it you found yourself actually invested. You were not pretending. The interest was real, the care was genuine. Something had shifted. Not because the thing became more interesting while you were looking at it, but because you're having given yourself to it. Having spent your time and energy on it, having done the thing, meant your mind moved to find it worthy of what you gave. It had to. Otherwise you were a person who wasted their time on something meaningless. And the mind prefers almost any story to that one. That is the ghostwriter. Quiet, invisible, relentless, noting what you have already done, and then composing a feeling that fits. And 2 years after Festinger named the mechanism, he and a colleague named James Carlsmith ran an experiment that showed exactly how far this could be pushed. It became one of the most cited studies in all of social psychology. Not because it was complicated. In fact, it was almost comically straightforward. But because the result made no sense at all on the surface and perfect sense underneath. Here is what they did. Participants came into a laboratory at Stanford University. One by one, they were given an hour of genuinely, thoroughly, almost heroically boring tasks. Emptying a tray of spools and then filling it back up. Turning pegs in a pegboard a quarter turn at a time, over and over. For an hour. There was nothing stimulating about any of it. That was the point. Afterward, the experimenter explained that the study was about how expectations affect performance, and that some participants were supposed to be told beforehand that the tasks were exciting and enjoyable. The person who was supposed to deliver this message, the experimenter said, had not shown up. And then, and this is the hinge of the whole experiment, he asked the participant to fill in, to go out into the waiting room and tell the next person, a woman sitting there, that the tasks they were about to do were actually quite fun and interesting. In other words, to lie. Half the participants were paid $1 to do this. The other half were paid $20. Then, afterward, every participant was interviewed separately and asked how they had actually found the tasks. How enjoyable had they genuinely been? What did they really think? The people paid $20 said the tasks were boring. Of course they did. $20 in 1959 was a meaningful sum. There was a perfectly good external reason for having said what they said. They had been paid. The lie sat outside them, fully explained, and their honest opinion remained intact underneath it. They could hold both thoughts without conflict. I said it was fun, but only because I was paid. I don't actually believe it. The behavior and the belief were separate, and they stayed separate, because the money provided a clean reason for the gap. But the people paid only $1. They said the tasks had actually been quite enjoyable. $1 was not enough. $1 could not carry the weight of having lied to another person, having looked her in the eye and told her something you believed to be false, for almost nothing. With only $1 explaining it, the gap between the behavior and the belief became too large, too uncomfortable, too dissonant. And so the mind moved. It quietly revised. It found ways to remember the task as not quite so dull, the pegs as not quite so meaningless, the hour as not quite so wasted. It edited the experience into something that explained what the person had already done. The less you were paid, the more your mind rewrote what you truly felt. This is the load-bearing edge of the whole principle. the under-justification effect, as it is sometimes called. The idea that the more clearly your behavior is explained by something external, money, pressure, obligation, fear, the less work the mind has to do to account for it, and the less the feeling shifts. But when the external explanation is thin or absent, when there is no good reason for what you did other than that you did it, the mind reaches inward. It reaches toward the only story left. You must have meant it. You must have wanted to. You must have felt it was worth doing, because what kind of person does something like that for nothing? Now carry that back to the favor, and feel how it lands. When someone does you a favor, a real, small, freely given favor, not one extracted through guilt or demanded or purchased, and there is no large external reason for it, no obvious payment, no visible pressure, the mind of the person who gave that favor is left with the same puzzle the $1 participants faced. Why did I do that? I helped him. I went slightly out of my way. I lent something, or spent a few minutes, or crossed a small distance on his behalf. Why? And the answer the mind arrives at, gently, without drama, is because he is worth it. Because I like him more than I realized. Because there is something in him that earned my small effort, and my effort, in turn, was not wasted. The feeling has been rewritten, and the warmth that comes from this rewriting feels entirely genuine. Because it is. It was authored by the person who now feels it. It was composed, quietly, from their own actions, their own small investment, their own freely chosen behavior. This is not fake affection, it is real affection that was born through an unusual door. That door is the one Benjamin Franklin understood, and it is the one Festinger gave us the language to name. But there is a second way of looking at the same room, and it belongs to a psychologist named Daryl Bem. Bem looked at the dissonance findings and said, gently, precisely, carefully, that they did not necessarily require all of Festinger's machinery. You did not have to posit an inner discomfort, a pressure, a hum of wrongness. You could arrive at the same place without any of that internal drama. Bem's theory, which he developed through the late 1960s and refined in the early 1970s, is called self-perception theory. And it is, in a way, even more unsettling than Festinger's account, because it is simpler. It does not propose an inner conflict, it proposes an inner observer, one who is watching from a strange distance, almost as if watching someone else, and drawing conclusions from what that someone does. His argument was this: people infer their own attitudes and emotional states by observing their own behavior in the same way that an outside observer might. In the same way that, if you watch a stranger do something kind for another person for no obvious reason, you conclude that the stranger must be a kind person who likes the other person. When you yourself do something kind for no obvious reason, you make the same inference about yourself. You watch your own hands, you read your own actions, and you conclude accordingly. I helped him, therefore I must be someone who cares about him. I did not have to help, and I did. What does that tell me? It tells me I must like him. No discomfort, no pressure, no hum. Just the quiet act of reading yourself the way you might read a stranger, from the outside in, and updating the story of who you are and what you feel based on what your body already did. Whether it is Festinger's account or Bem's, or some blending of the two that varies by person and situation, the result is the same. Action precedes feeling. Behavior is written in ink, attitude comes after in pencil, quietly conforming to the lines already drawn. And this is what makes the favor work. Not gratitude flowing back from you to the person who helped, but the self-story flowing inward, in the heart of the person who helped, becoming warmer, becoming fonder, becoming more disposed to see you generously. Let us explore a story about this. Let us call her Marta, and she is not a historical figure, only an illustration of something true. Marta worked in a large office, the kind where people are friendly but not quite friends, where many people share the same hallway and the same coffee machine and the same vague feeling of being known but not truly known. There was a man in her office named Paul. She did not dislike him. He was simply neutral to her, a face in the corridor, someone whose name she knew and whose presence she registered without particular feeling. Neutral, the grey furniture of the social world. One Tuesday, Paul stopped her in the hallway and asked, in a slightly embarrassed, slightly hopeful way, if she happened to know anything about the new scheduling software the department had just installed. He had been struggling with it for 2 days, he said, and he had noticed she seemed to have figured it out faster than most. Could she spare 10 minutes to show him a few things? Marta almost said she was busy. She was, a little. But she said yes, and they sat together at his desk, and she walked him through the parts that had puzzled him, and it took perhaps 15 minutes, and then she went back to her own work. Nothing dramatic happened, no lightning, no revelation. But the following week, when a colleague mentioned Paul's name, Marta found herself saying something warm about him. She had not planned to. She was not performing. It arrived naturally, a small, genuine, unprompted kindness in her voice. And if she had looked closely enough at herself in that moment, she might have noticed that she thought of him differently now. Not because he had changed, not because she had discovered something new about his character, but because she had done something for him. She had spent 15 minutes. She had given something, freely, and for almost nothing, no payment, no large obligation extracted, no crowd watching. Only the quiet fact of having helped. And her mind, reading that fact the way it reads anything, had arrived at the only story that made sense of it. He must matter to me. A little. Otherwise, why did I do that? She did not know she was running Festinger's experiment. She did not know she was illustrating Bem's theory. She only knew that Paul was somehow more likable than she had previously noticed. This is how ordinary human warmth is manufactured in places we do not think to look. Not through grand gestures, not through the slow accumulation of shared history, but through small investments freely made that the investing mind then has to justify, and does so by finding the object of the investment worth more than before. Which brings us to the thing that flattery cannot do. People compliment each other all the time. You know this. You have heard the kind words, the easy praise, the smooth expressions of admiration, the messages that land in your inbox or your ears and feel, almost immediately, slightly hollow. Not always. There are times when a compliment opens something real, and you feel it without skepticism. But you have also felt the other kind, the praise that slides off, that you cannot quite believe, that produces a reflexive, half-embarrassed thanks, and then evaporates. Why does flattery so often fail to do what it is trying to do? Because words cost almost nothing to give, and the mind of the person hearing them knows this. Saying something kind requires no sacrifice, no risk, no real investment of self, and because it costs so little, it carries almost no dissonance-resolving weight. There is no behavior to justify. There is no action that needs an attitude to explain it. The words sit in the air and then disappear, leaving very little behind. But an action, a small, real, freely given action, is different. An action requires the body to move. An action costs something, even if only a few minutes of time and attention. And the mind, facing an action it has already taken, must account for it, must find in itself a reason, must reach toward a feeling that makes the behavior coherent. Words float, actions stick. Not because actions are more visible to the other person, though they sometimes are, but because actions are more visible to the self that watches and reads and edits the story of who we are and why we do what we do. This is why a favour is a stronger bridge between two people than 100 compliments. Not because the recipient is more impressed by it, though they may be, but because the giver is changed by it in the quiet machinery of their own interior, in a way that a compliment never changes anyone. And this, too, is why it matters that Franklin asked for the book rather than gave one. He could have found out what books his rival admired and sent one over with a gracious note. He could have offered a fine dinner, a public acknowledgement, a generous word in the assembly. These things might have produced some goodwill on the surface, but they would not have done what the request did. Because in giving, Franklin would have remained the one who acted, and the feeling generated would have been his own self-narrative of benevolence. But in asking, he handed the action to his rival. He made his rival the giver, and all the warm-feeling consequences of that action, the self-story, the quiet revision, the "I suppose I must not dislike him so much after all," those accrued to the man who held the book. Franklin handed him the experience of helping, and the mind that experiences helping is the mind that ends up closer. He knew this. He said so in a way. He called it an old maxim. An old maxim, meaning it was not his discovery, not something he had worked out from first principles. It was folk wisdom that had been circulating long enough that he learned it, absorbed it, and decided to apply it deliberately as a young man navigating the treacherous social landscape of colonial Pennsylvania politics. The precision with which he used it, the choice to ask rather than give, the smallness of the request, the specificity of the object, the warmth of the thank you note, the promptness of the return, none of that was accident. Franklin was, by his own account, a student of human nature in the most practical sense. The Junto, the mutual improvement club he founded as a young man in Philadelphia, was itself an exercise in engineered social capital, a group of people who met to ask each other questions, to exchange problems, to invest in each other's growth through small, regular, reciprocal acts of intellectual generosity. Franklin understood early that mutual investment builds bonds. He had been practicing this long before he borrowed his rival's book. But the name came later. The term the Ben Franklin effect was not coined by Franklin himself. He would not have called it that. It was applied retroactively by psychologists in the 20th century, looking back at his autobiography and recognizing in his story the mechanism they had been studying in their laboratories. The man named the practical wisdom, the scientists named the man, and in that small irony, the living practitioner, not knowing what he was practicing, would one day be a textbook entry, "There is something that feels right." True things rarely announce themselves. They are usually just done, quietly, effectively, and named afterward by someone looking back. What Franklin recorded in his autobiography was not a lesson in psychology. It was a piece of self-congratulation, really, a chapter in the story of a clever man who outmaneuvered a difficult situation. But self-congratulation and wisdom are not mutually exclusive, and the sentence he left behind, "He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged," is precise enough that it reads less like boasting and more like a finding, like a man who ran an experiment without calling it that, recorded the result without calling it that either, and then offered it in passing to anyone who might find it useful. The useful thing is this: liking runs forward from doing, not backward from receiving. And yet, and this is where we need to slow down for a moment and resist the elegant simplicity of it, there are two ways of describing the same mechanism, and it is worth letting both of them rest in your mind without forcing them to fight. Festinger says the behavior creates a discomfort when it conflicts with the prior attitude, and the mind resolves the discomfort by revising the attitude. Bem says there is no discomfort at all, only a cool, quiet observation of what the self has done, and a logical inference about what the self must therefore feel. Two routes, the same destination. Researchers have argued about which account is closer to the truth. They have designed studies trying to distinguish them, trying to catch the ghost of inner conflict in the act, trying to find the moment where dissonance begins and simple inference ends. The honest answer is that both are probably operating in different proportions in different people at different moments. The distinction matters to theorists. It does not change the practical fact, which is the one that Franklin relied on and Jecker and Landy confirmed. Do a favor for a person, freely, for little external reward, and your own mind will, in its own time, find ways to think more warmly of them. Not because you decided to, not because they charmed you into it, but because the quiet editor in the basement of your mind looked at what your hands did and concluded, in its slow and methodical way, that you must have had a reason. And the reason it settles on is the most comfortable one available: that you like them, that they are worth it, that something in the texture of who they are made this small act of yours make sense. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the names Festinger, Carl Smith, Bem, Franklin, let them all soften a little. Let them become less like a list of facts and more like a low hum of recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when something you have always dimly known is finally given words. Quick reminder, after years of lying awake with a racing mind, deep sleep finally became possible. Now learning comes easier, energy is real, and the mind stays sharp. Sleeping like a baby changed everything. If you want the exact system that made this possible, check the link in the pinned comments. When you are ready, we will continue together. So, you are already whole. You do not need to carry any of this carefully. You do not need to remember the names, the year, the dollars. What you might carry, if something from tonight stays, is only the feeling of the principle, the sense that the way people come to care is stranger and more interesting and more human than we usually admit. That caring is not always the beginning. Sometimes it is the aftermath. Sometimes it is what the mind arrives at, having already acted, having already given a small piece of itself, and now needing a story for why. There is something in this that is worth returning to slowly, because it touches not just the mechanics of being liked, but something older and harder to name, the question of what it means to come to love something or someone, how that kind of love is made, and where it comes from, and whether it matters at all that it begins with a borrowed book or a recovered debt, or 15 minutes in front of a software screen before it becomes something genuine and warm. Festinger would say the feeling is real even when its origin is mechanical. Bem would agree, in his more measured way. The self-story that forms around a freely given action is not a lie. It is an inference, and inferences, when confirmed by repeated experience, become the bedrock of genuine feeling. The warmth that begins as post hoc rationalization can become, through time and contact and accumulated small acts, the real thing. The same way a muscle that was once only exercised to justify the effort put into it can become, through the habit of use, genuinely strong. This is one of the gentler truths the mechanism holds. Not only that you can be liked by asking, but that the liking that results is not counterfeit. It is authored by the person who feels it, from materials they provided themselves. You gave them the occasion. They built the feeling, and what people build, they tend to keep. There is a line from Franklin's autobiography that does not often get quoted alongside the famous one. He says, after describing the whole small drama of the request, and the book, and the returned volume and the warm note, he says the man ever after manifested a readiness to serve me on all occasions, so that we became great friends, and our friendship continued to his death. Great friends, lifelong, from a borrowed book. And that friendship was not a trick that wore out, not a manipulation that expired once the mechanism was understood. It was a real friendship, built on a moment that was engineered, but that led to something genuine. The ghostwriter got the story started, but the two men lived it for real. This matters, in ways we will return to. There is a question that runs alongside everything we are exploring tonight, a question about the difference between using a principle and misusing it, between inviting someone into a connection and farming their emotions for your own purposes. That question is not one we need to resolve tonight. It is one we will hold carefully as we follow the thread a little further still. Into the place where effort attaches warmth, where giving can turn into the very thing it was trying to avoid, and where the line between being cared for and being manipulated is thinner and more important than almost anyone who talks about this is willing to say. But that is ahead of us. What we have found here in this part of the night is the engine, the quiet, patient, almost impersonal engine that sits underneath the Franklin effect and all its cousins. Behavior is written first. Feeling is edited to match. The less external pressure explains the behavior, the more the internal revision digs in. And the warmth that results, that genuine, experienced, felt warmth, is assembled in the mind of the person who acted, not in yours. You did not make them like you by being impressive. You made them like you by giving them the chance to help. And their mind did the rest. There is an old observation, the kind that is so obvious it only sounds obvious after someone says it, that the most interesting stories are often the ones where the protagonist does not realize what they are doing. And neither does the reader until the moment of recognition arrives. Franklin did not write about cognitive dissonance. He wrote about cleverness and social navigation and an old maxim he had heard somewhere and decided to try. The people in Festinger and Carl Smith's study did not know they were revising their own felt experience. They only knew they had said something, and that somehow the memory of the task felt different afterward. Marta in the office did not know she was running an experiment when she said yes to Paul's question. She only knew, a week later, that she felt differently about him than she had before. The mechanism does not announce itself. It does not require your awareness to operate. It simply happens in the space between what the hands do and what the heart concludes, the way the tides happen in the space between the moon and the sea, quietly, reliably, moved by a force neither the water nor the shore has to understand in order to be changed by it. And you have been changed by it many times, in both directions. Someone helped you, and you grew fonder without knowing why. You helped someone and found warmth growing in the helping, warmth you had not expected and could not entirely account for. The mechanism was there in both moments, composing its quiet revisions, leaving its fingerprints on feelings you thought you had simply felt on your own. Festinger named the pressure. Carl Smith helped measure it. Bem offered a mirror. Franklin applied it with extraordinary deliberateness and then noted the result in his autobiography as if reporting the weather. He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged. The person who helps you ends up loving you, and they do not always know that is what happened. They think they simply discovered, on reflection, that you are someone worth helping. They think they noticed something in you that they had not previously seen. They think the feeling came from you. But it came from them. It was theirs all along. You only gave them the occasion to find it. And here is where the story takes a turn you may not have expected. Because if that is true, if the warmth belongs to the person who acted, if the feeling follows the deed like a shadow follows a body, then something strange follows from it. Something that most of us have been getting quietly, persistently, painfully wrong. Let us stay with that for a moment. There is a woman you may know, or perhaps you are her, or something close to her. She is the one who remembers birthdays, who sends the card, makes the meal, drives the hour each way without being asked, who shows up when others don't, who gives of herself with such steady generosity that it has simply become the shape of her days, the texture of her relationships, the water she swims in. She gives, and gives, and gives, and somewhere underneath the giving there is a quiet expectation, not a demanding one, not a calculating one, but a reasonable one, a human one, that all of this kindness will have made her beloved. And then one day she looks up and notices something that she cannot quite explain. She is not beloved in the way she imagined. She is appreciated, yes, in the vague way we appreciate air. She is taken for granted. She is the last one texted back. The one whose name does not come up first when good news is shared, who hears about things a little late, who senses, underneath the warmth people claim to feel for her, a quality of weightlessness, as if her presence in their lives has become so expected, so reliable, so costless to them, that it no longer registers as anything remarkable at all. She is hurt by this. Of course she is. And she is confused, because the arithmetic seems wrong. She did the math of love in good faith. More giving should equal more gratitude, should equal more closeness. She put more in and expected more out, and instead finds herself standing in a room full of people who depend on her and somehow do not quite see her. And the thing is, the hard thing, the thing that takes a long time to sit with. She is not wrong that she is kind. She is wrong about what kindness does. This is what the science has been circling, and it will require us to go somewhere a little uncomfortable before it opens into something useful. Let us explore a story about effort. Not about asking, not yet. About effort itself, and what it does to the human heart. In 1959, the psychologist Elliot Aronson, together with his colleague Judson Mills, ran an experiment at Stanford University that has been disturbing people comfortably ever since. They were interested in a simple question. Does it matter how hard you work to get something when you are deciding how much you like it? To test this, they told women who had volunteered for their study that they were joining a discussion group about the psychology of sex. To qualify, they explained, they first needed to pass a short screening test. Some of the women were given what the researchers called a severe initiation. They were asked to read aloud to a male experimenter sitting across from them a list of obscene words, and then to read 2 vivid passages from contemporary novels describing explicit sexual encounters. This was 1959. The embarrassment involved was real and significant, and there was no way to exit gracefully once you had agreed. Other women were given a mild initiation. They were asked to read aloud a small handful of words related to sex, but mildly, clinically, words like virgin, prostitute, petting, uncomfortable perhaps, but nothing like the first group. A third group was admitted with no screening at all. Then every woman listened to the same recording of the group's discussion. And here is the critical detail. Aronson and Mills had made sure the recording was, by design, genuinely dreadful. The topic was secondary sex characteristics in lower animals, dry, meandering, flat. The group members on the tape interrupted each other, contradicted themselves, dropped threads without picking them up, went nowhere for minutes at a time. Aronson called it one of the most boring conversations he had ever constructed on purpose. After listening, each woman rated the group and its discussion. You can probably feel where this is going. The women who had gone through the severe initiation, who had burned with embarrassment to get into that room, rated the group as significantly more attractive, more intelligent, more interesting than the women who had waltzed in without effort. The same recording, the same droning conversation about fish. The women who had suffered to get into that room heard something different in it, or rather, their minds told them they had. The mild initiation group landed somewhere in the middle. The no initiation group liked it least. Effort had attached warmth to something that did not deserve it. The mind had done what it always does, worked backward from the fact of the cost already paid, and concluded that the thing must have been worth it. Because otherwise, what kind of person pays that cost? We have been doing this all our lives. You have been doing this all your life. Somewhere there is a friendship you worked to earn that you value more fiercely than one that came easily. A relationship you fought to save that, once saved, seemed precious in a way it had not been before the fighting. A skill you struggled toward in the dark that you love more tenderly than the things that came quickly. We call this loyalty or appreciation or depth. Sometimes it is those things. But underneath all of them, quietly doing its work, is the same engine Aronson and Mills observed, the mind adjusting its assessment of the destination to justify the distance it has already travelled to get there. Take a slow breath. Notice the weight of this against your skin, the places where the air holds you, the small sounds of wherever you are. We will continue gently. Now, what does any of this have to do with a borrowed book? Everything. Because the favour you grant someone is, in miniature, an initiation. It costs you something. Not what Aronson's participants paid, not embarrassment, not labour, but it costs you time, or attention, or the small act of interruption, of setting aside what you were doing. And having paid that cost, your mind does what it does. It writes the story backward. It finds the reason you were willing. The favor is effort, and effort attaches warmth to its target. There is a name now for a phenomenon that follows from the same root. In 2011, a team of researchers, Michael Norton, Daniel Moschen, and Dan Ariely, published what became one of the quietly beloved little studies of behavioral science. They called what they found the IKEA effect. You may already sense, just from the name, what they were getting at. They ran a series of experiments in which people were asked to build things. Simple things, origami frogs and cranes. IKEA storage boxes. The people built them. The boxes were ordinary. The origami, if we are being honest, was not especially beautiful. It was the kind of thing a beginner produces, lovable mainly to its maker. Then Norton and his colleagues asked the builders how much they would pay for what they had made. And they asked other people who had not built the objects, the same question. The builders, consistently, valued their creations far more highly than observers did. They were willing to pay nearly as much for their clumsy IKEA box as for a professionally assembled one, for their slightly lopsided origami crane, for the object they had put together with their own hands, even when they could plainly see it was imperfect. We overvalue what we help build. This is not irrational. Exactly, it is human. The effort we put into something becomes part of it, in our experience of it. We cannot fully separate the object from the making of it. The box is the box plus the hour we spent, the instructions we misread, the moment we got the back panel in the wrong way and had to start again. The crane is the crane plus the concentration it demanded, the folds that had to be undone and redone. The sweat is in the thing, even if no one else can see it. And here is the part that belongs to our story tonight. Norton, Moschen, and Ariely were describing furniture and origami, but the same mechanism runs through human relationships, and it does so with consequences that are difficult and important and worth sitting with in the quiet of this hour. When someone does a favor for you, grants a small request, spends even a modest amount of their time or attention on your behalf, they are building something. In the same way the furniture builder is building something, the relationship becomes in small part a thing they made. They put their effort into it. And because we overvalue what we help build, they overvalue what they now have a stake in. You are the IKEA box. Not in a diminishing way. In the most human way possible. They assembled something that involved you, and now it feels like theirs, worth more to them than it was before, worth protecting, worth continuing to invest in. The favor did not just soften their feeling in the moment, it gave them ownership. And ownership produces care in a way that mere receiving rarely does. Think of it from the other direction. If someone hands you a completed piece of furniture, flat-packed and already built, and left on your doorstep as a gift, you may feel grateful. For a while. But if you built it yourself, even if someone suggested the project, even if someone provided the instructions, it is yours in a different, deeper sense. You would sooner part with the gifted one. This is what it means to let someone invest in you. Not to exploit them. To give them a stake. To let them be the builder. And now, consider the foot in the door. In 1966, two researchers named Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser conducted a study that has become a fixture in the psychology of persuasion. They were interested in a simple question. Does saying yes to a small request make you more likely to say yes to a larger one later? They knocked on doors in residential neighborhoods in California. In one condition, they asked homeowners for a small favor Would they display a small 3-inch sign in their window supporting safe driving? Almost everyone agreed. It was easy. It cost almost nothing. A few weeks later, they came back. This time, they asked if the homeowner would agree to have a large, somewhat ugly billboard placed in their front yard with the words "Drive" carefully printed on it in large block letters. They showed people a picture of what the sign looked like. It was, by most accounts, not attractive, and it would be there for a week. In a separate condition, they went directly to homeowners who had not been asked the small sign request and asked only for the large billboard. The difference was stark. Among homeowners who had not been primed with the small request, only about 17% agreed to the billboard. Among those who had said yes to the small sign weeks before, the agreement rate was more than 76%. Saying yes once had more than quadrupled compliance. Friedman and Fraser called this the foot-in-the-door technique. The name comes from an old image of a door-to-door salesperson who puts one foot across the threshold before you can close the door, a small incursion that makes the larger one easier to follow. But the mechanism was not about thresholds or salespeople. It was about identity. When you say yes to the small request, the small sign, the small favor, the small act of lending your time, something shifts in how you understand yourself in relation to the thing and the person you said yes to. You are now someone who has helped, someone who is apparently the kind of person who cares about this, who assists this particular person, who is, in some small way, on their side. That self-image does not evaporate between the first request and the second. It sits there, quietly, being true of you, until the second request arrives and you evaluate it through the lens of who you have already revealed yourself to be. And the kind of person who helped once tends, very naturally, to be the kind of person who helps again. The favor starts small, not as a trick, not as a manipulation waiting to reveal itself, but because the small favor is the doorway. It is the first fold of the paper. It is the first wall of the flat pack box. Once someone has made even the smallest gesture of investment in you, once they have, by their own free action, declared themselves in some minor way on your side, the space between you changes. They are no longer neutral, and neutrality, once given up, is hard to reclaim. This is why Franklin borrowed a book, not a horse. A book is returnable. A book takes minutes. The ask was calibrated, small enough to grant easily, specific enough to require a genuine act, real enough to matter. He was not asking for nothing. He was asking for the smallest possible something that would still require the man to act. And the man acted, and the warmth followed from the acting. Now, here is where we turn the picture over and look at what is on the other side. Because everything we have covered so far explains why asking works, why effort attaches warmth, why the person who invests becomes the person who cares. And that is genuinely useful and true and worth knowing. But it is only half the story. The other half is what happens on the far side of the equation, and it is the half that explains the woman at the beginning of this hour, the one who gives and finds herself strangely invisible, strangely unreturned. Let us explore what happens when you give too much. There is a framework in psychology called equity theory. It was developed by the psychologist J. Stacey Adams in 1965 and expanded by Elaine Wolster, Ellen Burscheid, and G. William Wolster in 1978. The central insight is simple, but its implications branch outward in every direction. Equity theory says that people do not simply want to receive as much as possible in their relationships. They want relationships that feel fair, balanced, where what flows in and what flows out are roughly proportional. Not perfectly equal, not measured to the gram. Human beings do not actually count that way, but approximately matched. Close enough that neither person feels like they are dramatically above or below the other. When relationships feel equitable, people feel comfortable, content, they can relax into the connection. When they feel inequitable, when one person is clearly giving far more than the other, when the scales are visibly tilted, both people feel something. And this is the part that surprises people every time they encounter it. Both of them. The person who is under-benefiting, who is giving more than they receive, feels something obvious, resentment or fatigue, or a quiet sense of unfairness that builds slowly like water against a dam. But the person who is over-benefiting, who is receiving far more than they are giving, does not simply feel lucky, does not simply feel grateful. They feel something unexpected, something that the relentless giver has not accounted for. They feel guilty, not always consciously, not in a way they can always name or would admit over dinner. But the surplus of kindness, the imbalance of giving, sits in them as a low, persistent discomfort. Because to be the permanent recipient, to live in a relationship where you are always on the receiving end, where you never get to be the helper, where you never have the agency of giving, is to be in debt. And debt does not feel warm. It feels heavy. And here is the terrible irony. The thing that the overgiver rarely understands until the damage has been done, the person you have over-benefited will often begin, gradually, without planning to pull away. Not because they are ungrateful, not because they are unkind, but because proximity to you has become the place where they feel their own inadequacy, where they are reminded, without either of you saying so, that they owe more than they have given, that they are not holding up their end. And people do not linger comfortably in the places that make them feel small. So the overgiver, who has poured herself out trying to earn love, finds instead that her love has made people uncomfortable in her company. And she cannot understand what went wrong. Because she did everything right. She was generous, she was present, she gave more than anyone asked. She gave so much that she left no room for the other person to give anything back. And she took from them, without meaning to, the one thing that turns assistance into affection, their participation. You cannot fully love what you did not, in any way, help to build. This is why the IKEA effect is not just a study about furniture, it is a study about what it means to have a stake in something. And you cannot have a stake in something you only ever received. There is another force at work, too, a force, with a name that sounds almost legalistic, because the psychologist who identified it was precise in his thinking and careful in his language. Daryl Bem, in 1966, named it reactance. The idea is this: human beings have a fundamental orientation toward their own freedom, their sense of being agents, of making their own choices, of not being controlled or obligated or managed. When that sense of freedom is threatened, when someone pushes too hard, gives too insistently, creates pressure through sheer volume of generosity, something in the person pushes back. Not necessarily with words or actions, sometimes just with a quiet, internal withdrawal. A cooling, a pulling inward of the very warmth the giver was trying to elicit. Reactance is the feeling you get when someone is trying too hard to make you like them, when the gifts keep coming uninvited, when the favors pile up so quickly and so steadily that they have stopped being gifts and started to feel like a campaign, like leverage, like an argument you did not consent to enter and cannot easily exit without seeming ungrateful. You have felt this. You know the slight unease that comes with receiving too much from someone, the mild resistance that rises when you sense that generosity is being deployed as strategy, even if the person doing it is unconscious of their own motivations. Your instinct knows before your mind does. Your instinct reads the imbalance, reads the pressure, and begins very quietly to resist it. The giver, watching this withdrawal, often responds by giving more, because giving is the only tool they know. And the more they give, the more the other person retreats, and the cycle feeds itself until the relationship has quietly suffocated beneath the weight of all that unreciprocated generosity. Bem observed this in many contexts. The underlying principle is consistent. When people feel their autonomy threatened, they reclaim it. And one of the ways we reclaim autonomy from someone who is trying to bind us with kindness is to devalue the kindness itself and to devalue the person offering it. We say to ourselves, consciously or not, that we did not ask for this, that we do not need it, that we are not obligated, that they are perhaps not as wonderful as they are presenting themselves to be. The relentless giver has, without meaning to, become a threat to the other person's sense of freedom, and the other person has responded with the only move available: distance. A request, by contrast, does something almost opposite. A request, a genuine, modest, freely grantable request, honors the other person's agency. It says, "You have something I need." It assumes their competence. It gives them the choice to help or not help, and in giving them that choice, it treats them as capable, as having resources worth drawing on, as someone whose participation is not guaranteed and is therefore meaningful. A gift says, "I have surplus." A request says, "You have value." And those land differently in the human chest. There is one more piece to set into place before we can stand back and see the full shape of what all this means. It is perhaps the saddest piece, in a quiet way, and it belongs to that woman at the beginning, the one who gives and finds herself invisible. In 1971, a pair of researchers named Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell wrote about something they called hedonic adaptation. The term is clinical. The experience it describes is achingly familiar. Human beings are built to notice change, not states, but shifts. The mind is finely tuned to detect what is different from before, what is new, what has altered, and far less responsive to what has simply continued unchanged. This was, for most of human history, an excellent design. You do not need your nervous system to keep reminding you that the same rock is still there. You need it to notice when a new one appears, or when a familiar one moves. The brain economizes. It treats the stable as invisible and saves its attention for the novel. This adaptation is why a raise in salary produces happiness for a few months, and then the new income becomes the baseline, and you are back to approximately where you were before. Why moving to the city you dreamed of feels electric for a while, and then the city is simply where you live. Why the first time someone does something kind for you, you notice it fully, feel it deeply, and the 47th time, it is simply what they do. This is what happens to the overgiver's generosity. It starts as a gift, noticed, felt, appreciated, but it is steady. It does not change, it does not fluctuate or surprise. It is simply always there, like the rock that has not moved. And the mind, which is built to notice change and not states, gradually stops registering it. The kindness becomes the baseline becomes invisible, and the invisible cannot be appreciated, no matter how much it is worth. The person who gives every week, without fail, without variation, without ever asking for anything in return, has trained the people around them to treat their kindness as the floor, not the ceiling, as the minimum, not the extraordinary, as nothing to remark upon, because it has always been so, and what has always been so is not remarkable. And then, occasionally, someone else, someone who does not give as much, who does not show up as reliably, who in fact asks more than they offer, says something kind once, unexpectedly, does one small thing, reaches out one time in a moment that was slightly surprising, and the people around them light up. They notice it, they feel it, they remember it. The one-time gesture from the occasional person lands harder than the thousandfold kindness from the constant one. Not because people are ungrateful, not because they are calculating, because the brain is a machine for detecting what has changed. And what changes is what we see. This is not a comfortable thing to hear, if you recognize yourself in the giving. And I am not saying it to be cruel to the givers among us, who are often the most genuine and tender-hearted people in any room. I am saying it because the cruelty of remaining ignorant of it is greater than the discomfort of knowing it. Because the overgiver, year after year, is spending herself into exhaustion in service of a model of love that does not work the way she imagines it does. And the truth, uncomfortable as it is, at least offers the possibility of something different. The thing that would make people notice her, the thing that would register as change, as meaningful variation, as something worth attending to, is not more giving. It is something she has been taught, perhaps, to see as weakness, to see as asking too much, or being a burden, or admitting need in a way that feels vulnerable and uncertain. It is letting someone do something for her. It is making the small ask. Breathe for a moment. Let that settle if it needs to. The room is quiet. The night is where it is. You do not have to figure anything out right now. You can simply let the pieces rest where they have landed and follow them a little further when you are ready. These 4 mechanisms, the effort that attaches warmth to what it costs us, the overvaluing of what we help build, the guilt and distance that over-benefiting creates, the reactance against generosity experienced as pressure, and the invisibility of the constant and unchanged. These 4 are not separate problems. They are different facets of the same underlying shape. They are all, at their root, descriptions of how human beings experience investment. What investment does to the investor. What the absence of investment does to the one who only ever receives. What constancy does to attention, and what change does to attention. And how the two work together to determine what we feel and whom we feel it for. The person who invests in you, even a little, even once, even in the small act of granting an easy request, has done something to themselves on your behalf. They have altered the ledger of their experience in some small way, and the alteration matters. The mind notices it. The mind works with it. The mind builds on it. And what it builds is, over time, something that looks a great deal like care. The person who only ever receives from you has no such alteration to work with. They have been given things, and given things, and given things, and the giving has become the wallpaper of their experience with you. Noticed once, faded into background, taken, without cruelty, for granted. This is not a story about ingratitude. It is not an indictment of the people who have received your kindness and not returned it in kind. It is a story about the architecture of human feeling, about how warmth is built and maintained, and what it requires of all the people involved. And what it requires, consistently, is participation. From everyone. including the one who finds it hardest to ask. The woman who drives the hour each way without being asked is not being selfish when she imagines that all this giving has built something solid. She is not wrong to want to be loved, she is only wrong about the method. She has been adding to the structure alone, quietly, diligently, not understanding that the structure needs others' effort in it to hold that love. Like IKEA furniture is not something you build for someone and hand to them finished. It is something you build together. Even if you are the one who picks the pieces, even if you are the one who reads the instructions, even if you are the one who says in a small and uncertain voice on a quiet afternoon, "I need a little help with this part. Could you hold that while I get the other piece?" And they say yes. And the holding matters more than either of them knows. There is a mistake, though, that is easy to make here. A mistake so natural, so understandable, that even people who have studied this carefully have fallen into it. And it matters to name it clearly. Because if you confuse two things that look like each other from a distance, you may walk away from everything we have been talking about and draw entirely the wrong conclusion. The mistake is this: confusing the Ben Franklin effect with its mirror image. They are not the same. They operate through different pathways. They move in opposite directions. And collapsing them into one muddy lesson, the way a lot of people do when they talk about this, ruins the insight entirely. The way mixing two complementary colours produces only grey. So let us hold them side by side for a moment and look at them clearly. In 1971, a psychologist named Dennis Regan ran a study that has become one of the foundational pieces of evidence for something most of us already feel in our bones. He arranged for a confederate, someone working with the research team, though the participants did not know this, to do unsolicited favours for people during a break in what appeared to be an art-rating experiment. In one condition, the confederate would simply return from the break and bring back a small bottle of Coca-Cola for the participant. Unprompted, unrequested, just, "Here, I got you one." Later, when the confederate asked those participants to buy raffle tickets, a small, slightly awkward request from a near stranger, the people who had received the Coke were significantly more likely to comply. They bought more tickets than people in a control condition who had received no favour. And here is the key part. They bought more tickets even when the confederate wasn't particularly likable. The debt did the work, not the warmth. The obligation ran the engine, not the affection. This is reciprocity, one of the oldest and most studied principles in all of social psychology. You did something for me, and now I feel I owe you something. The favour flows in one direction, and the sense of indebtedness flows back. It is clean. It is almost mechanical. It has been documented across cultures, across species even. There are primates who return food, groom in exchange for protection, track debts across time. Reciprocity is ancient and powerful and real. But it is not the Ben Franklin effect. In the Ben Franklin effect, the favour flows the other way. I do something for you. I am the one who gives, who helps, who lends. And the thing that shifts is not your sense of owing me, it is my sense of liking you. The warmth that gets produced in the exchange attaches not to the receiver of the favour, but to the giver. I become warmer toward you because I helped you, not because you helped me. Do you feel the difference? Hold both in your mind at once. Regan's Coke study, you receive a small gift, and afterward you feel a pull toward the giver. Obligation is the thread. You are paying a social debt. Jecker and Landy, 1969, you give something back, you hand over money you had won, because the experimenter asked you to, and afterward you feel genuine warmth toward him. More warmth than the people who kept the cash felt, more warmth than people who were never asked at all. You gave something away and ended up liking the person more. These run in opposite directions. The levers are different. The mechanism underneath each one is different. And if you conflate them, if you walk away thinking the lesson is that doing favors builds connection, you have accidentally fused two separate truths into a single confused one. And in doing so, you have lost the sharpest thing about either of them. The sharp thing about the Franklin effect, the thing that makes it genuinely counterintuitive, is precisely that it runs contrary to the reciprocity expectation. We understand reciprocity, we feel it, it is in our bones. You did something nice for me, so I am warmer toward you. That makes sense. The Franklin effect is the part that doesn't make sense. At first, you let me do something nice for you, and now I am warmer toward you. That is the strange piece. That is the one that requires an explanation. And the explanation, cognitive dissonance rewriting attitude to match behavior, or self-perception observing its own hands and drawing a conclusion about its own heart, is what the last several hours of this have been walking through. Keep them separate. They are both true. They are both useful to understand. But they are not the same river. Now, given everything we have explored, what does all of this look like when you try to live it? Not as a formula, not as a tactic, but as an honest understanding of how human closeness tends to grow. There are a few practical clarifications worth naming, because the theory without them is like a map without a scale. It gets you in the right direction, but leaves you guessing about the distances. The first one is this. If you are going to let the mechanism work, if you are going to let someone do something for you, to invite that small investment that begins the quiet rewriting, the favor you ask for should be small, genuinely small, not a burden, not a test, not a grand request that requires significant sacrifice, a small, grantable, real thing, something they can say yes to without it costing them much, but not so trivial that saying yes requires no actual act. The calibration matters. There is a particular form of favor that tends to work especially well here, and it is one that researchers and practitioners in negotiation and persuasion have noted repeatedly. It is asking for someone's advice, not their endorsement, not their help with a task that puts them to real trouble. Their advice, their opinion, their knowledge on something where they have more experience than you do. This costs the giver almost nothing in time or material resource. But notice what it does. It tells the other person that you believe they have something worth hearing, that you see them as capable and experienced and worth consulting, that you came to them specifically, not to anyone else. There is a particular quality of being chosen for your expertise that is quietly flattering in the way that very few things are. Because it is not complimenting your appearance or your personality, both of which a stranger can say and sound hollow, it is registering something about what you know, what you have lived, what you have built. And because the act of giving advice requires a small real investment of thought and attention, it creates the gentle investment that allows the mechanism to do its work. The giver thinks about you, forms an opinion, shapes a response, and in doing so, they have already begun participating in the construction of something between you. Ask for advice. It is the lowest cost, highest yield form the favor can take. There is a second clarification that matters, and it has to do with what happens after the favor is done. Franklin did not simply ask for the book and receive it and move on. He returned the book, promptly, and with it he sent a note strongly expressing his sense of the favor. He thanked the man with warmth. He closed the loop. This matters more than it might first appear. When someone does something for you, when they help you, when they give their advice, when they make a small effort on your behalf, the story they are quietly telling themselves about why they did it is still, at that moment, somewhat open. They acted. The behavior is fixed. But the narrative justification is forming. And the moment you receive what they gave with genuine, visible gratitude, with the kind of thanks that confirms their investment was seen, was valued, was real, you participate in locking that self-narrative into its warmest possible form. They helped you. You thanked them. They can now complete the story. I helped someone who was worth helping. I was right to do so. Expressed appreciation is not a nicety. It is not the pleasant social coating on top of the real mechanism. It is part of the mechanism. A favor exploited without acknowledgement, received and forgotten, taken as if it were owed, can curdle. The giver, whose self-perception was in the process of quietly rewriting toward warmth, hits a friction point. The thank you never came. And what began as a gentle investment in connection can reshape into something more like I was used. The mechanism reverses. Thank people. Thank them in words. Specifically, Franklin's note was specific enough to convey that the book had been received, used, valued, returned with care. That specificity matters. A vague thanks so much can function almost as a dismissal. But I read the chapter you recommended, and it helped me understand what I was missing, and I am genuinely grateful that you took the time. That closes the loop cleanly. The giver's self-narrative sets. And it sets warm. Now, there is also a dimension of this that has nothing to do with strategy, and that is worth sitting with for a moment. Because the whole conversation so far has been framed partly in terms of mechanism, of lever, of cause and effect. And while all of that is real and verifiable and worth understanding, there is a different way to see the same truth that doesn't involve mechanism at all. The psychologist Arthur Aaron spent decades studying what it is that actually generates closeness between people, what the conditions are, what produces the felt sense of being genuinely near someone, of having something real between you. And one of the most consistent findings across his research is the role of vulnerability, of mutual self-disclosure, of revealing something you don't reveal to everyone, of allowing yourself to be seen needing something, wanting something, uncertain about something. Asking for help is, by its nature, a vulnerable act. When you ask someone for something, even something small, you are acknowledging that you cannot do all of it alone, that they have something you need, that you are willing to be seen in that small moment of incompleteness. And that particular willingness to let someone witness you asking is not a weakness dressed up as a tactic. It is one of the most direct invitations to closeness that exists, because it says, I trust you enough to let you see this. I am not performing sufficiency for you. I am here, actually, and I actually need the book, and I believe you are the kind of person who might lend it. This is why let people do things for you is not a manipulation technique, or not only one. It is also, when done genuinely, a form of connection. You are not tricking someone into caring by engineered indebtedness. You are inviting them into the actual texture of your life. The favor is real because the need is real. And real need, honestly expressed, has always been one of the portals between people. Franklin understood this, by the way, in a way that went well beyond a single borrowed book. Over the course of his life, he built something called the Junto, a small mutual improvement club that he founded in Philadelphia in 1727, when he was barely 21. It was a group of a dozen or so tradespeople and artisans who met every Friday evening to discuss philosophy, politics, and practical matters. And the design of it was deliberate in exactly this way. Every member was expected to ask questions, to bring genuine puzzles, genuine uncertainties, genuine requests for the knowledge of others. The form of the meeting, built in the mutual investment, the reciprocal need, the regular practice of turning to each other for what you did not have alone. Franklin did not invent mutual aid, obviously, but he formalized its social logic into an institution. He understood, perhaps better than almost anyone of his era, that networks of genuine affection and loyalty and usefulness are not built by any single impressive person distributing gifts downward from a position of surplus. They are built by people who turn to each other regularly and say, "Here is what I know. Here is what I need. Let us think together." The junto ran for decades. The friendships it forged were real and lasting and productive in ways that far exceeded anything Franklin could have manufactured through sheer one-way generosity. He called the book Borrowing Trick an Old Maxim, which is interesting. He did not claim credit for the insight. He presented it as something already in the folk understanding of human nature, a piece of accumulated social wisdom that predated him and that he was simply applying deliberately. The name the Ben Franklin effect was hung on it retroactively by psychologists in the 20th century looking back at his autobiography and finding in his account what they recognized as a form of the mechanism they had been studying in laboratories. He lived the effect. They named it. There is something worth noticing in that a truth about human nature was already old by 1740, already being passed around as received wisdom, already known by mothers and grandmothers and tavern keepers and diplomats, long before anyone had designed an experiment to prove it in controlled conditions. Some things about people do not require discovery. They require recognition. Now we should talk about the edges of this, because no tendency in human psychology is absolute, and the Franklin effect is no exception. There are conditions under which it works best, and conditions under which it simply does not work, or reverses, and it is important to know both. The effect is most reliable when a few things are true at once. The favor should be small enough to be granted without significant cost or sacrifice. Ask too much, too early, and the request does not read as an invitation to connection. It reads as an imposition. The emotional arithmetic tips the other way. The favor should be freely chosen. This one is load-bearing. Remember what the Festinger and Smith study showed about justification. When an act has a large external reason, a big payment, an obvious coercion, a clear social obligation that leaves no room for personal interpretation, the mind does not need to rewrite the self-narrative. There is a ready-made explanation. I did it because I was paid, or I did it because I had to, or I did it because it would have been rude to refuse. No attitude change required. The dissonance never has to be resolved because the external cause absorbs it. But when the favor is freely granted, when the person could have said no, when there is no substantial reward waiting, when nobody forced the issue, the mind is left with only its own behavior to explain itself. And that is when the quiet rewriting happens. I did it because I wanted to. Because, apparently, I feel warmly enough toward this person to help them. The freedom is essential. Remove it, and you have removed the conditions that make the effect work. The person being asked should not already actively dislike you with great intensity. This is worth naming plainly. The Franklin effect is not a reset button. It does not work reliably on genuine enemies, on people who have deep and well-reasoned objections to you, on anyone whose dislike has hardened past a certain point. Franklin's unnamed rival in the Pennsylvania Assembly was someone who opposed him, who had given a hostile speech, but he was not, from the account, someone who despised Franklin with the kind of settled conviction that would be immune to a gentle social overture. The mechanism works in the soft territory of mild antagonism, unfamiliarity, mild suspicion. The vast ordinary space of people who have no particular warmth for you yet. It does not reliably thaw out something frozen solid, and the favour should ideally not be transactional in its framing. That is to say, a request that carries the implicit weight of "I expect something in return," that lands with the feel of a business arrangement, an exchange negotiated in advance. Shifts the meaning of the act. It becomes a transaction, not an invitation. Transactions don't rewrite how people feel about the counterparty, they just settle debts. Where it reverses, ask for something too large, or ask with pressure, or repeat the request so many times that compliance starts to feel coerced, and you will not produce warmth. You will produce exactly what the research on reactance predicts. Jack Braime's work in the 1960s described reactance as what happens when people feel their freedom being constrained. Heavy, repeated, or oversized requests read not as invitations, but as impositions. The recipient doesn't think, apparently, "I must like this person." They think, "I need some space from this person." The effect has flipped. There is also the honest replication caveat worth naming. The Franklin effect is robust as a tendency, well documented across multiple studies, recognizable in experience. It is not, however, an iron law that activates mechanically in every circumstance. Some replications of the specific favor-liking paradigm have produced weaker or more context-dependent effects. Psychology is not a periodic table. Human beings are not hydrogen atoms. They do not behave identically under identical conditions. Culture modulates things too. The cognitive dissonance resolution pathway, "I must like him, because why else would I have helped him," seems to run most strongly in individualistic cultural contexts. Where the self is the primary unit of reference and personal attitude is the language of self-explanation. In more collectivist settings, the same act may be processed primarily through the lens of social role and obligation. "I helped because that is what one does," which may not produce the same internal attitude shift. This is not a reason to dismiss the effect. It is a reason to hold it as a real and meaningful tendency with edges, not as a universal law with no conditions. And now, finally, we arrive at the question that has been hanging over all of this since the very beginning. The one that makes certain people uneasy the moment they start to understand how the mechanism works. The one that is worth addressing directly, because it deserves a direct answer. Is this manipulation? Let us sit with this honestly rather than rush past it. Because the same sequence of events, noticing that someone is not particularly warm toward you, asking them a small, genuine favor, receiving it with gratitude, watching the relationship thaw, can be either a natural and beautiful piece of human connection or a calculated extraction, depending entirely on something the mechanism itself cannot see. The mechanism is blind to intent. The cognitive dissonance rewriting works the same way whether the person who asked was genuinely hoping to become friends or was running through a checklist of social engineering techniques. The giver's warmth is real either way. The chemistry is identical. This is what makes the ethics question serious rather than easy. The manipulation test, such as it is, comes down to intention. Not outcome, not method, but what you actually want from the other person. And within that, whether you are inviting a real relationship or farming a feeling. When you ask someone for something because you genuinely need it, and the asking opens a small window between you that neither of you had before, and you receive what they give with real gratitude and let that gratitude be visible. And the warmth that grows is something you tend and return and build upon. That is not manipulation. That is connection. You used the mechanism, yes, in the sense that you understood something about how people work and did not pretend otherwise. But the relationship is real. The investment is mutual. The warmth on both sides has a foundation. When you ask for something you do not need from a person whose warmth you want only to extract for some purpose unconnected to them as a person, and you plan to ask again, in escalating steps, using each granted favor as a lever for the next, without any genuine interest in the friendship you are generating as a side effect, that is something different. The mechanism is identical. The other person's feeling is real. But it has been produced without honest invitation, and it exists without a relationship underneath it. You are farming a feeling that someone is experiencing as a real connection, and they do not know the difference between the two. That asymmetry is the problem, not the asking. Not the understanding of how warmth builds, not the willingness to let people invest in you. The problem is the absence of an actual relationship underneath the warmth being generated, the presence of a person who feels they are building something with you while you are building nothing back. There is a useful question you can ask yourself, quietly, before asking for something. It does not require a framework or a checklist. It is simply this: do I want to know this person, or do I want something from them? Both can be true at once, of course. Most real relationships involve wanting things from people. We want their company, their time, their advice, their presence on difficult days. Wanting is not the problem. The problem is exclusively wanting, with no genuine interest in who they are when they are not providing the thing. If the answer is I want to be in relationship with this person, and I am going to ask them something because I genuinely need it, and because I trust this is a reasonable thing to ask, then the mechanism you are activating is also honest. The warmth it produces will find a real vessel. If the answer is, I want a specific outcome from this person, and I am going to use their own psychology against them to produce it, then the mechanism is real, but what is being built on top of it is not. You can also run this test from the receiving end. If you have ever found yourself liking someone more and more and not quite understanding why, and then notice that you have been the one consistently doing things for them, bringing them things, helping them, solving small problems on their behalf, being asked and saying yes and asked again and saying yes, it is worth pausing at that recognition, not with suspicion, but with a kind of honest self-inquiry. Is this a relationship I am actually building, or is this a pattern I have been stepped into? Are they investing in me the way I am investing in them, or is the investment only flowing one direction? The mechanism works on all of us, all the time, whether anyone intends it or not. Knowing it exists is a form of being able to see more clearly. And then, at last, the simplest version of everything. We began, hours ago, with the woman who drives the hour each way without being asked. The relentless giver who gives and gives and finds, to her quiet bewilderment, that the giving has not built what she believed it was building. that the person she has been so generous toward does not feel the warmth toward her that she has so consistently directed toward them. And we asked why. The answer now is not complicated. She has been doing all the building, he has been receiving the finished pieces, and love, human attachment, genuine warmth, the specific texture of caring about a particular person, does not arrive as a delivery. It is produced in the act of building, by the one who builds. This is not a story about generosity being wrong. Generosity is real and necessary and beautiful, and there is something precious about a person who gives freely without keeping accounts. The world needs that. The point is something more specific. The point is that if you want someone to feel genuinely, durably warm toward you, not obligated, not grateful in the way that curdles into debt, but actually fond, actually glad when you appear, then the most reliable thing is not to give them more. It is to let them give to you. To let them hold the piece while you go get the other one. To ask the question you do not know the answer to admit the small uncertainty, to say, in whatever the natural form of it is in your life, I could use a hand with this, and I thought of you. And then to receive what they offer with the same quality of attention you would want your own offerings to receive. To actually use the advice they give. To return the book promptly. To write the note that says, this mattered, and I saw it, and I am grateful. Because here is the last thing, the one sentence that contains everything. If you want someone to like you more, don't do them a favor. Let them do one for you. That is Franklin's old maxim, restated in its barest form. He knew it. Jecker and Landy demonstrated it. Festinger explained the engine underneath it. Bem described what it looks like from the inside, the way we watch our own hands and conclude what must be in our own hearts. Aronson showed it in the suffering that makes things precious. Norton and Moshon and Ariely found it in the flat-pack furniture we assembled ourselves. Bem found its shadow in the resentment that too much giving can produce. Brickman and Campbell showed how the wallpaper fades. All of it, every strand, arrives at the same place. People become attached to what they build. The builder is the one who comes to care. And the question you live with, somewhere underneath all of this, is not so much how to use this to make people like you. It is something quieter and harder and more personal than that. It is whether you are willing to be the kind of person who asks, who says I don't know and means it, who says I could use some help with this and waits in the small uncertain moment while another person decides whether to offer their hand. That moment, the one where you have asked and the answer is not yet known, is the same moment that Franklin sat in, having sent his note to the unnamed rival, waiting to see if the man would send the book or leave the request unanswered. Something was at stake. Something was risked. He had put himself in the position of needing something from a man who did not like him. And that position, needing, asking, risking, is what made the space for something to change. Not the speech he gave, not the flattery he didn't offer, not the impressive deeds he performed. The book he asked to borrow. A very scarce and curious book, sent immediately. Returned a week later with warm thanks, a lifelong friendship that outlasted the rivalry entirely. That is what asking can do when it is done honestly, from genuine need, with the attention and gratitude it requires to complete the loop. It is not a trick. It is an invitation. It is the specific form of vulnerability that says, I see you clearly enough to know that you have something I need, and I trust you enough, or want to trust you enough, to ask. The rest, the quiet rewriting, the warmth that follows the act, the self-perception that builds from behavior, happens on its own. You do not have to manage it. You only have to ask. And then, when they hand you the book, to hold it with both hands. So tonight, wherever you are, if there is someone in your life you have been trying to reach through the long labor of giving, if there is a distance that more generosity has not been able to close, consider the small possibility that the road runs the other way, that the distance might close, not when you offer something new, but when you let them offer something to you. A question they could answer. A task you genuinely need. A moment where you are honestly not the one who knows, and they are. It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be a confession or a grand gesture. It can be as small as a borrowed book, as small as a question asked in good faith, as small as two people, one of whom reaches slightly toward the other, and the other of whom, in the act of reaching back, finds that they have moved a little closer without quite knowing when it happened. That is enough. That is, in fact, most of it. The rest is just time, and the slow accumulation of small moments in which two people went on choosing, in their different ways, to be toward each other. Let that settle somewhere in you now. Let the thoughts that came while you were listening go wherever thoughts go when they are finished. You do not need to carry any of it. You do not need to solve anything tonight, or plan anything, or rehearse the conversation you might have tomorrow. You listened. That is enough. The architecture of human warmth is patient. It was here before Franklin's Pennsylvania Assembly, and it will be here long after everything we have examined tonight has been absorbed and forgotten and lived. It does not need your help. It only needs your willingness, occasionally, to let it work. Let your body settle where it is. Let the quiet come in around the edges of this room, this hour, this particular night of your life. Whatever you are carrying, whoever you are thinking of, you can set it down for now. Morning will still know where you left it. One last sleepy beep before the dark. Good night.